Story 1. The Mirror Highway. Douglas Kent had been driving cross-country routes for 17 years when he encountered the highway that reflected itself. In July of 2024, Douglas was hauling furniture from North Carolina to Sacramento, taking Interstate 40 west through the desert. Around 4 in the morning, somewhere in the Arizona wasteland between Holbrook and Flagstaff, Douglas noticed something strange in his mirrors. Behind him, perfectly matching his speed and position, was another truck, identical to his. Same make and model, same color, same configuration. Even the trailer appeared identical, down to the company logo and DOT numbers on the side. Douglas keyed his CB radio. "Breaker 19, this is Rambling Man. Got a driver behind me in what looks like my twin truck. You monitoring this channel? Over." No response. The truck maintained its position exactly 100 yards back, matching every lane change, every speed adjustment Douglas made. Douglas tried his phone, thinking to call his company and ask if they had another identical truck on this route. No signal. That wasn't unusual in this remote stretch of Arizona desert, but combined with the mysterious twin truck, it felt ominous. He decided to test the situation. Douglas accelerated to 75 miles per hour. The truck behind matched his speed instantly, maintaining that exact 100-yard distance. He slowed to 55. The truck slowed with him, perfectly synchronized. Douglas took the next exit, a remote turnoff leading to a closed rest area. The twin truck followed, taking the exit at the exact same moment, their movements mirror perfect. The rest area was abandoned, the facilities long since closed, just empty parking spaces and weathered buildings. Douglas pulled into a parking spot and watched his mirrors. The twin truck pulled into a spot exactly opposite his, facing him from across the parking area. Douglas grabbed his flashlight and climbed out. In the pre-dawn darkness, he could see the other truck clearly. It was identical to his in every detail. Same scratches on the bumper, same mud pattern on the wheels, even the same air freshener hanging from the rearview mirror. He walked toward it slowly. As he approached, he saw the driver's side door was open, just like his was. The cab was illuminated, just like his was, but no driver was visible. Douglas reached the truck and looked inside, empty. No one in the driver's seat. No personal items, no signs anyone had ever been there. Just an empty cab that perfectly mirrored his own truck. He walked around to the trailer. The cargo doors were sealed, just like his were, with the same seal number. Douglas checked his paperwork. The seal number on his truck was JH447293. He looked at the twin truck's seal. JH447293. Identical. This was impossible. Seal numbers were unique, issued one per shipment. 2 trailers couldn't have the same seal number. Yet here it was, physical and real, impossible to deny. Douglas heard an engine start. He spun around. His truck, the one he'd arrived in, was pulling out of its parking spot. He ran toward it, shouting, but it accelerated away, driving back toward the highway entrance. Douglas stood in shock as his truck disappeared onto the interstate. He turned back to the twin truck, the one that remained. It sat there, engine running, waiting. He approached cautiously and looked inside. The interior was identical to his truck, but when he checked the registration and paperwork, he found something disturbing. The documents listed his name, his company, all his information. But the dates were wrong. The registration showed the truck had been purchased 3 years in the future, in 2027. Douglas climbed into the cab. Everything felt familiar. Same worn spot on the seat where he always sat. Same crack in the dashboard. Same stain on the floor mat. This was his truck. Or rather, it was his truck from a different time. He sat there trying to understand. The highway had somehow reflected his truck, creating a temporal mirror. His present truck and his future truck had occupied the same space simultaneously, and when he'd left his original vehicle, it had continued without him, while he remained with the future version. Douglas checked the trailer. He needed to know if the cargo was real. He broke the seal and opened the doors. The furniture was there, properly loaded and secured. Everything appeared normal. He got back in the cab and pulled onto the highway, heading west. The truck drove normally. The GPS showed his location and route, but Douglas couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had changed. After an hour of driving, Douglas saw another truck ahead. As he got closer, his heart sank. It was his truck again, the original one, the one that had driven away from the rest stop. It was ahead of him now, maintaining a steady speed. Douglas accelerated to catch up. As he got closer, he saw himself in the other truck. He could see his own face in the driver's side mirror, looking back at him. His past self, still driving the original truck, unaware that his future self was following in a temporal duplicate. Douglas tried the CB radio. "Breaker 19, this is Rambling Man calling Rambling Man. Can you hear me? Over." His own voice responded from the other truck. "This is Rambling Man. Who is this? How do you know my handle? Over." "This is going to sound insane, but I'm you. From a few hours in the future. You're about to pull into a closed rest area and find a duplicate of your truck. Don't get out. Don't leave your truck. If you do, you'll end up like me, driving a version of your truck from the future while your original truck continues without you." Silence on the CB. Then his past self responded, voice uncertain. "This is some kind of joke, right? Who put you up to this? It's not a joke. Check your mirrors. You'll see a truck identical to yours following you. That's me. That's the future version of your truck that you'll find at the rest area." Douglas watched as the truck ahead of him swerved slightly, the driver clearly checking his mirrors and seeing the identical truck behind him. "What the hell?" His past self's voice came through the CB, shaking. "How is this possible?" "I don't know. Something about this stretch of highway creates temporal reflections. Listen to me carefully. Take the next exit and turn around. Head back east. Don't stop at that rest area. If we can get away from this section of highway, maybe the phenomenon will end." But as Douglas spoke, he saw something that made his blood run cold. Ahead of the truck his past self was driving, another identical truck appeared, a third version, and beyond that, barely visible in the distance, more trucks. A whole convoy of identical vehicles stretching into the distance. "There are more," his past self said over the CB, panic evident. "There are dozens of them, all the same truck. What's happening?" Douglas understood with dawning horror. The highway wasn't just reflecting his truck once. It was reflecting it infinite times, creating copies from every possible moment. Past versions, future versions, all existing simultaneously on this cursed stretch of road. "We need to get off this highway," Douglas transmitted. "All of us, every version, we need to break the pattern." But how did you coordinate infinite versions of yourself, each existing at different points in their own timeline, each making different decisions based on different amounts of information? Douglas tried. He broadcast on the CB explaining the situation, telling every version of himself to exit at the next off-ramp. Some responded, others didn't. The convoy of identical trucks began to fragment, some taking exits, others continuing on the highway. Douglas took an exit that led to a small state highway heading north. He watched his mirrors as other versions of his truck made different choices. The convoy split and split again, each version pursuing its own path based on its own understanding of the situation. Douglas drove for 20 miles on the state highway, seeing no other versions of himself. Maybe he'd escaped. Maybe by leaving Interstate 40 he'd broken free of the temporal reflection phenomenon. He pulled into a truck stop to refuel and collect himself. As he pumped diesel, he noticed other truckers staring at him. One older driver approached. "That your rig?" the man asked, pointing at Douglas's truck. "Yeah, why?" "Because there's one just like it on the other side of the pumps. Identical, down to the company logo and the scratches on the bumper. Douglas walked around the pump island. There it was, another version of his truck currently being fueled by another version of himself. Their eyes met across the distance. Both Douglas Kents stared at each other, each seeing his own face, reflected in impossible reality. The other Douglas walked over. "You're from the Mirror Highway too?" "Yeah, I thought I'd escaped." "Same, but I don't think we can escape. I think once you're reflected, once the highway creates copies of you, those copies exist permanently. We're not temporal anomalies that will fade away. We're real. All of us, every version." Douglas felt dizzy. So there are dozens of us, all driving identical trucks, all trying to complete the same delivery? Maybe hundreds. I've been monitoring the CB. I've heard at least 50 different conversations between versions of us, all trying to figure out what happened, all trying to find a way back to being the only Douglas Kent. "Is there a way?" The other Douglas shook his head. "I don't think so. I think we're stuck like this. Multiple versions of the same person, each convinced they're the original, each trying to live the same life." They stood in silence, two identical men facing an impossible situation. Finally, Douglas asked, "What do we do?" "Complete the delivery, I guess, take the payment. Try to figure out how to exist in a world where you're not unique anymore. Where dozens of versions of you are all trying to do the same job, live in the same house, call the same family." Douglas thought about his wife and kids. What would happen when multiple versions of him tried to go home? Would they believe any of the Douglas Kents were really him? Or would they think they were all imposters, copies, some kind of bizarre cloning situation? He completed his fuel stop and continued toward Sacramento. The delivery went normally. The receiving company didn't notice anything unusual. Douglas collected his payment and started the drive back home to North Carolina. But as he drove, he monitored the CB constantly. He heard other versions of himself on various channels. Some were ahead of him on the route. Some were behind, all heading home, all expecting to return to their normal lives. Douglas reached his house 3 days later. He pulled into the driveway and saw 2 other trucks already there, identical to his, parked in the street because there was no room for all 3 in the driveway. His wife met him at the door, her expression confused and frightened. "Douglas, what's happening?" "2 other men who look exactly like you showed up already. They both claim to be you. They both have the same memories, the same information about our life together. I don't know which one is real, or if any of you are real." Douglas tried to explain about the Mirror Highway, about the temporal reflections. But he could see she didn't fully believe him. How could she? The situation was insane. Over the following weeks, more versions of Douglas arrived. Each one had taken slightly different routes home, making different decisions about when to stop and where to refuel. Eventually, 17 different Douglas Kents showed up at the house, all claiming to be the original, all having the same memories up until that moment on the Mirror Highway. They tried to figure out which one was the real Douglas, but there was no way to determine it. They were all real, all equally valid, all existed with the same legal rights, the same claim to the identity of Douglas Kent. His wife eventually left, unable to cope with the situation. His company terminated his employment, unable to have one driver occupying 17 separate trucks. His life fell apart as the logistics of being 17 people simultaneously became impossible to manage. The other versions of Douglas scattered. Some changed their names and tried to start new lives. Others continued driving trucks under assumed identities. A few simply disappeared, unable to cope with existing as copies. Douglas, the version telling this story, moved to a small town in Montana. He took a job at a warehouse, not driving trucks anymore. He changed his name legally to Douglas Kane, trying to distance himself from the other versions. But he knows they're out there. 16 other Douglas Kents, all living separate lives, all haunted by the same memory of that morning on Interstate 40 when they encountered the Mirror Highway and everything changed. Douglas monitors trucker forums online. Occasionally, he sees reports from other drivers who've encountered similar phenomena. Temporal reflections, multiple versions of themselves, convoys of identical trucks appearing on remote highways. The Mirror Highway phenomenon isn't unique to his experience. It's happened to others. Maybe it's still happening. And Douglas wonders, on some distant highway at some remote hour, are new copies of him still being created? Is there an infinite convoy of Douglas Kents somewhere, all driving the same truck, all experiencing the same impossible situation? He'll never know. He can't go back to that stretch of Interstate 40, can't risk creating more copies, can't face the possibility that the reflection never stopped, that somewhere in Arizona his truck is still being duplicated over and over, spawning infinite versions that will eventually have to figure out how to exist in a world that only has room for one of them. Douglas lives quietly now. He avoids mirrors. He avoids reflective surfaces. Because sometimes when he catches his reflection, he sees something in his own eyes. A question, a doubt, the terrible suspicion that maybe he's not the original Douglas Kent. Maybe he's just one more copy convinced of his own reality, unable to accept that he might be nothing more than a temporal echo of someone else who drove down the wrong highway at the wrong time and got reflected into infinite copies, each one certain they're the real one, each one wrong. Story 2. The Truck Stop That Ages You. Maria Rodriguez had been hauling refrigerated goods for 13 years when she stopped at a truck stop that stole her time. In October of 2023, Maria was transporting frozen food from Minnesota to Texas, a straightforward run down Interstate 35. Around midnight, somewhere in northern Iowa, she pulled into a truck stop called the Crossroads Travel Plaza for fuel and food. The facility looked modern and well-maintained. Bright lights illuminated the fuel islands. The convenience store and restaurant appeared clean and busy. Maria pulled up to the diesel pumps and began fueling her rig. As the fuel flowed, Maria noticed something odd. The other truckers at the fuel islands looked tired. Not just road-tired, but deeply exhausted, with dark circles under their eyes and a worn quality that suggested more than just a long shift behind the wheel. Maria went inside to pay and grab a sandwich. The convenience store was stocked normally, but she noticed the dates on the newspapers were wrong. They showed tomorrow's date. Not unusual, she thought. Sometimes papers were distributed early. But every newspaper, every magazine showed dates from the future. At the counter, the clerk looked ancient. Not just old, but weathered in a way that suggested a hard life. Deep wrinkles, age spots, trembling hands. The name tag read Susan, but gave no last name. "First time here?" Susan asked, her voice crackling. "Yeah, just passing through, long haul to Texas." Susan's expression turned sad. "Be careful. This place isn't what it seems. Try not to stay too long." Maria paid and left, the clerk's cryptic warning nagging at her. She returned to her truck and resumed her journey south. An hour down the road, Maria glanced in her rearview mirror and gasped. The face looking back at her was wrong, older. She had wrinkles that hadn't been there an hour ago, gray streaks in her hair where there had been none. Maria pulled over immediately and checked herself in the mirror. She looked years older. Not dramatically so, but noticeably. She pulled out her phone and opened the camera app, checking herself from multiple angles. The aging was real. She'd aged at least 5 years in the hour since leaving the truck stop. Panic set in. Maria tried calling her husband. When he answered, his voice sounded different, older, tired. "Maria, where are you? You said you'd be home 3 days ago. I've been worried." 3 days? I left Minnesota yesterday. I'm in Iowa." Maria, you left Minnesota 5 days ago. Are you okay? You sound confused. Maria checked the date on her phone. October 23rd. But she'd left Minnesota on October 18th. That was 5 days ago. She'd lost 4 days somehow. Or gained them. Time was wrong. She looked in the mirror again. Her face looked even older now. How was this possible? Maria pulled back onto the highway and drove as fast as she dared. She needed to get home to figure out what was happening. But as she drove, she felt herself aging. Her joints ached. Her vision blurred slightly. Her hands on the steering wheel looked more weathered, more spotted. She was aging in real time. Years passing in hours. Maria pulled into another truck stop, a normal one this time, and ran to the restroom. She looked at herself in the bright fluorescent lights. She was old. Not elderly, but middle-aged, where she'd been young just hours ago. She looked like she was in her 50s instead of her 30s. She tried to call her husband again, but the number wouldn't connect. She tried her daughter. Same thing. All her contacts seemed to lead to disconnected numbers. Maria checked her driver's license. The photo showed her younger self, but when she looked at the expiration date, it showed 2018. 5 years expired. How had she been driving on an expired license, and why hadn't she noticed? She looked at her truck's registration, 2019. Everything was out of date, as if the truck had been abandoned for years. Maria went back to her rig and checked the trailer. The refrigeration unit was still running, but when she opened the doors, the frozen food had spoiled, thawed and rotted, as if it had been sitting without proper refrigeration for weeks. She was losing time. Not just hours or days, but the truck stop had somehow caused her to skip forward through time, while simultaneously aging her body to match. Maria tried to retrace her route, to find the Crossroads Travel Plaza again. Maybe returning to the source of the phenomenon would reverse it. She drove north on I-35, watching for the exit she'd taken, but she couldn't find it. The exit didn't exist. She drove past where it should have been 3 times. No sign, no exit ramp, no truck stop, just empty highway. Maria pulled over and checked her Maps app. The Crossroads Travel Plaza didn't appear anywhere. She searched online for it, no website, no reviews, no evidence it had ever existed. Yet she had a receipt from the fuel stop. She pulled it from her pocket. The paper was yellowed and brittle as if it were years old. The date on the receipt showed October 18th, but the receipt itself looked ancient. Maria continued driving south toward Texas, hoping to complete her delivery, hoping to get home and figure out what was happening. But as hours passed, she continued aging. By the time she reached the Oklahoma border, she looked 70 years old. Her hair was completely gray. Her skin was deeply wrinkled. Her hands shook on the steering wheel. She stopped at a hospital, desperate for help. The emergency room staff was confused by her story. They ran tests. Medically, she was an elderly woman. Her heart, her organs, her bone density, everything matched someone in their 70s. But her driver's license showed she was 37. "Is this some kind of joke?" the doctor asked. "This can't be your license. You're clearly decades older than 37. "I'm telling you, I was 37 this morning. Something happened at a truck stop. I'm aging impossibly fast." They kept her for observation, running more tests, trying to understand. But there was no medical explanation. No disease could cause aging this rapid. No toxin. No radiation exposure. She was simply old, as if decades had passed in days. Maria's family arrived. Her husband didn't recognize her. Her daughter, who should have been 12, was in her 20s. Time had passed for them too. Years had passed in the real world while Maria experienced only days. "Mom," her daughter said uncertainly, "what happened to you?" You disappeared 5 years ago. We thought you were dead. 5 years. Maria had lost 5 years at that truck stop, aged decades while 5 calendar years passed in the real world. The time differential was wrong, impossible, but undeniable. Maria tried to explain about the Crossroads Travel Plaza. Her family searched for it, found nothing, no evidence it existed, no other reports of drivers experiencing similar phenomena. But Maria searched trucker forums online, using her daughter's phone. She found threads deep in obscure forums where other drivers reported similar experiences. Truck stops that shouldn't exist, stops where time moved differently. Drivers aging impossibly fast after visiting certain facilities. One thread was particularly detailed. A driver called Big Rig Joe described stopping at a place called the Crossroads Travel Plaza in Iowa. He'd aged 20 years overnight, lost his job, his family, his entire life because no one believed what had happened to him. The thread was 7 years old. Maria contacted Big Rig Joe through the forum's messaging system. Days later, she received a reply. It's real. I've found 12 other drivers who experienced the same thing. We're trying to figure out what that place is. Best theory is it's some kind of temporal anomaly, a location where time flows at a different rate. When you stop there, you enter a time-dilated space. Hours inside equal years outside. And your body ages to match the external time flow. We're working on finding it again, documenting it, proving it exists. But it's like it moves. Different drivers reported at different locations, always called the Crossroads, always with the same effects. If you want to help, join our group. We're determined to stop this from happening to other drivers. Maria joined the group. 13 drivers, all elderly now, all having lost years or decades to the Crossroads Travel Plaza. They coordinated searches, sharing locations where they'd encountered the anomalous truck stop, trying to find patterns. What they discovered was disturbing. The Crossroads appeared to move, manifesting at different locations along major trucking routes. It appeared most frequently to drivers who were exhausted, who needed to stop but were pushing themselves to continue. It appeared as a tempting oasis, a place to rest and refuel. And once you stopped there, once you entered its time-dilated space, you paid with years of your life. The group theorized it was feeding on time somehow, harvesting the years it stole from drivers. The clerk, Susan, was always the same, ancient and sad, trapped there, unable to escape. Perhaps she'd been the first victim, or perhaps she was something else entirely, a caretaker of the temporal trap. Maria spent the remaining years of her life trying to warn other drivers. She posted in forums, shared her story, tried to document the phenomenon. But most people dismissed her as crazy or attention-seeking. The few who believed her couldn't help. How did you avoid a truck stop that moved, that appeared in different locations, that didn't show up on any maps? All you could do was be careful. When you were exhausted and desperate for a stop, be cautious about facilities you didn't recognize. Check reviews online before stopping. Don't trust a place just because it looks clean and well-maintained. Because the Crossroads Travel Plaza looked perfect. That was part of its trap. Maria died at age 92, though only 20 years had passed since that night in Iowa. Her actual age was 57, but her body had aged decades and days. At her funeral, her daughter shared her story. Most people thought it was a tragic case of early-onset aging disease combined with dementia. But in the back of the church, 3 other elderly truckers attended. Members of Maria's group. They knew the truth. They'd lived it. And after the service, they continued the work Maria had started, warning drivers, documenting sightings, trying to find a way to destroy or close the Crossroads Travel Plaza permanently. Because it's still out there, still appearing on highways across America. Still aging drivers impossibly fast, stealing years from their lives, feeding on temporal energy for purposes no one understands. If you're a trucker reading this, be careful. When you're exhausted and you see a perfect truck stop appear ahead, one you don't recognize, one called the crossroads, keep driving. Don't stop. Don't refuel there. Don't even slow down. Because every minute you spend in that place equals months or years in the real world. And when you leave, you'll be old. Your life will have passed you by. Everyone you knew will have aged normally while you aged exponentially. The Crossroads Travel Plaza is real. It exists somewhere in the spaces between normal truck stops. And it's waiting for tired drivers who need to rest, ready to steal their time and leave them as elderly strangers in a world that moved on without them. Maria Rodriguez learned this the hard way. She paid with 40 years of her life for 1 hour at the wrong truck stop. Don't make the same mistake. Stay alert, stay suspicious, and never ever stop at the crossroads. Story 3. The Cargo That Screamed. James Patterson had been hauling freight for 16 years, specializing in overnight runs where he could drive in peace without heavy traffic. In March of 2024, James accepted a rush delivery. Transport medical specimens from a research facility in Boston to a hospital in Miami. The pay was excellent, and the broker assured him the cargo was properly contained and documented. James loaded the cargo at midnight. The containers were sealed medical transport units, each about the size of a large cooler marked with biohazard symbols and temperature monitoring devices. Everything looked professional and legitimate. James secured them in his temperature-controlled trailer and started the long drive south. The first 8 hours were uneventful. James made good time through Connecticut and New York, heading down Interstate 95 as the sun rose. Around 8 in the morning, somewhere in Delaware, he heard something from his trailer. A sound that shouldn't be there. Screaming. James initially thought he'd imagined it. The road noise, the engine, his fatigue, all could create auditory hallucinations. But he heard it again. A high-pitched scream, muffled but definitely coming from his trailer. James pulled into the next rest stop and went to check his cargo. Everything looked secure. The medical containers were properly positioned, their seals intact, their temperature monitors showing correct readings. Nothing appeared disturbed, but as James stood in his trailer, he heard it again. The screaming, coming from inside one of the containers. Not quite human, too high-pitched, too sustained, but definitely a living creature in distress. James called his broker. "What exactly am I transporting? The cargo is making noise. Sounds like something alive and in pain." The broker sounded confused. "The manifest lists medical specimens, tissue samples, blood work, that sort of thing. Nothing alive." "Are you sure you're hearing something?" "I'm standing in my trailer right now. Something in these containers is screaming." "That's impossible. The containers are sealed. They went through proper medical transport protocols. There can't be anything alive in them." James opened his phone and checked the detailed manifest. It listed various medical specimens properly documented with biohazard classifications. Everything looked official, but the screaming continued. James approached the container that seemed to be the source. He could feel vibration through the metal. Something inside was moving, thrashing. "I'm not imagining this," James told his broker. "I need to know what I'm really carrying." "You're carrying exactly what the manifest says. Complete the delivery. You're being paid well to transport sealed containers, not to question their contents." James ended the call. He stood in his trailer, listening to the muffled screams, trying to decide what to do. Opening the containers would break the seals and potentially expose him to biohazards. But whatever was inside was clearly suffering. He made a decision. James carefully cut the seal on the screaming container and opened it. Cold air rushed out. The container was refrigerated to near-freezing temperatures. Inside, packed in ice and preservation gel, was something that made James's stomach turn. It looked like a fetus, but wrong, too large, too developed, and it was moving. Its mouth opened in silent screams. The sound James had heard was coming from some other part of its biology, not its mouth. The creature had too many limbs, too many joints. Its skin was translucent, showing organs that didn't look quite human. James stepped back, horrified. This wasn't a medical specimen, this was a living creature, something created in a lab, something that shouldn't exist. He checked the other containers. More creatures, different stages of development, different configurations. All alive, all preserved in induced hibernation, all screaming through biological mechanisms James couldn't understand. James immediately called the police. He explained he'd been hired to transport illegal biological experiments. The police told him to wait at the rest stop. They'd send someone to investigate. While waiting, James's phone rang. Unknown number. "Mr. Patterson, you've made a terrible mistake." The voice was calm, professional, menacing. "Those containers were sealed for a reason. You were not supposed to open them. You were not supposed to know what you were carrying." "What are those things? What kind of research facility creates living experiments and ships them across state lines? The kind that doesn't officially exist. The kind whose work is too important to be limited by regulations or ethics. You were selected as the transport specifically because your background check showed you ask few questions and complete deliveries reliably. You weren't supposed to disappoint us." "I've called the police. They're on their way." "No, they're not. The call you made was rerouted. You spoke to our people, not law enforcement. No one is coming to help you, Mr. Patterson. You're alone in a rest stop with cargo you weren't supposed to see." James looked around the rest stop. It was empty. Completely empty. No other vehicles. No travelers. Even the rest stop building looked abandoned, which was impossible. It had been active when he'd pulled in 20 minutes ago. "What do you want?" James demanded. "Continue your delivery, reseal the containers, complete the transport, forget what you saw. You'll be compensated with triple the agreed rate. Refuse and you'll join the specimens in their containers. We need test subjects for the next generation, living humans to see how they interact with the subjects. Your choice." James ran from his trailer, thinking to escape in his truck. But when he reached the cab, he found someone sitting in the driver's seat. A woman in a lab coat, her expression blank. "Hello, James. I'm Dr. Sarah Chen. I'm here to ensure you make the right decision." James backed away. "Stay away from me. I'm not transporting those things." "Those things, as you call them, represent decades of research. They're the future of medical science. Hybrid organisms designed to grow replacement organs, to test drugs without using animals, to advance human knowledge. Yes, they're alive. Yes, they suffer. That's unfortunate but necessary. It's illegal. It's immoral. It's necessary. And you're going to help us complete this transport, or you're going to become part of our research." "I'd prefer the first option." "You seem like a reasonable man." Dr. Chen pulled out a syringe. "This is a compound that induces selective amnesia. You'll forget the last hour. You'll remember loading sealed containers and agreeing to transport them to Miami. You'll complete the delivery, take your payment, and move on with your life. Or I can use this other syringe, which induces paralysis. You'll be conscious but unable to move while we load you into one of the containers alongside the specimens. Your choice. You have 30 seconds to decide." James looked around desperately for escape. The rest stop remained empty. No help was coming. He made a decision. "I'll take the amnesia. I'll complete the delivery, just don't hurt me." Dr. Chen smiled. "Wise choice. Hold out your arm." James extended his arm. Dr. Chen injected him with the syringe. Immediately, James felt dizzy. The world blurred. He stumbled and fell to his knees. When James woke, he was in his truck driving down the highway. Sunlight streamed through the windshield. His GPS showed him on Interstate 95 in Virginia heading south. He had no memory of the past several hours. He checked his logs. According to the system, he'd been driving normally. No stops except for fuel. Everything looked routine. But James felt wrong. Disconnected. Like he'd lost something important but couldn't remember what. He completed the delivery to Miami without further incident. The receiving facility was a legitimate-looking hospital. Staff in medical scrubs unloaded the containers efficiently, checking seals and paperwork. Everything appeared professional. James collected his payment, triple the original quote as promised, and started the drive back north. But something nagged at him, a feeling he was forgetting something crucial. He checked his arms and found an injection mark, fresh from recently. Why had he been injected? He had no memory of any medical procedure. James began investigating. He researched the facility he'd picked up from in Boston. It existed, but its research focus was vague, hidden behind layers of corporate structures and classified government contracts. He found forum posts from other truckers who'd transported cargo for similar facilities. Some reported missing time. Others reported vague memories of seeing things they shouldn't have seen. A few disappeared entirely, their trucks found abandoned with no sign of the drivers. James realized he'd been part of something illegal and dangerous, and they'd erased his memory to protect their secrets. He tried to remember that missing time, underwent hypnosis therapy. Slowly, fragments returned, screaming, creatures in containers. A woman with a syringe. Threats. The more he remembered, the more James wished he could forget again. Because knowing what he'd transported, knowing what he'd been forced to deliver under threat of becoming an experiment himself, was worse than not knowing. James quit trucking after that delivery. Too many routes might lead him back to facilities like that one. Too many brokers might be fronts for illegal research operations. Too many sealed containers might hold horrors he'd be better off never knowing about. He works in a warehouse now. Safe, predictable, no long-haul routes. But sometimes he wakes from nightmares of creatures screaming, of scientists with syringes, of waking up in a container next to hybrid organisms, becoming part of an experiment that official records will never acknowledge. And James knows the research continues. The creatures are still being created, still being transported in sealed containers, still screaming in their frozen prisons. Other truckers are hauling them right now, unaware or coerced, moving illegal biological experiments across the country under cover of legitimate medical transport. The screaming cargo exists. It travels our highways every day. And drivers like James who discover the truth are silenced with drugs that erase memories or worse, become test subjects themselves, their trucks found empty on the side of the road, the drivers never seen again, presumably stored in containers alongside the other specimens, conscious but unable to escape, screaming through biological mechanisms no one outside the labs can hear. Story 4. The Way Station That Weighs Souls. Raymond Foster had driven trucks for 19 years without incident. He followed regulations scrupulously, maintained his equipment perfectly, and stopped at every weigh station as required by law. In September of 2022, Raymond was hauling steel beams from Pittsburgh to Denver when he pulled into a weigh station in western Kansas that measured something other than truck weight. The station appeared normal. Standard configuration with scales built into the road, a small office building, signs indicating all commercial vehicles must enter. Raymond pulled onto the scales and waited for the system to register his weight and give him clearance to continue. But the display didn't show a weight in pounds. Instead, it showed a number, 73.2. Raymond frowned. That couldn't be right. His fully loaded rig weighed over 70,000 pounds, not 73. He waited for the system to correct itself. A voice came over the loudspeaker. "Driver, proceed to the office for inspection." Raymond parked and walked into the office. Inside, a man in a Department of Transportation uniform sat behind a desk, but something about him seemed off. Too still, too perfect, like a mannequin come to life. "Raymond Foster," the man said without checking any documents. "You're showing 73.2 on the scales. That's concerning." "I don't understand. My truck should weigh over 70,000 pounds. "We're not measuring your truck's weight, Mr. Foster. We're measuring your soul's weight, 73.2 kilograms. That's below the minimum threshold for commercial drivers." Raymond stared at him. "What are you talking about? Souls don't have weight. This is some kind of joke." In 1901, Dr. Duncan McDougall conducted experiments attempting to weigh the human soul. He concluded it weighed approximately 21 grams. He was wrong, of course. Souls vary in weight based on the moral choices made during a lifetime. Good choices add weight. Bad choices reduce it. "You're currently at 73.2 kilograms. The minimum for commercial drivers is 75. You're deficient." "This is insane. I'm leaving." "I wouldn't recommend that. Drivers who leave with deficient souls tend to have accidents within 100 miles. Fatal accidents. The universe has a way of balancing accounts. If your soul is too light, you're likely to make a mistake, a fatal error in judgment. Better to address the deficiency now." Raymond wanted to walk out to dismiss this as some bizarre prank. But something in the man's eyes suggested this was real. Impossibly real. "How do I address a soul weight deficiency?" "You make amends. You correct past wrongs. You add weight through good actions. Here's a list of the significant moral debts you're carrying." The man handed Raymond a printout. On it were listed events from Raymond's life, times he'd made choices that hurt others, lies he'd told, betrayals he'd committed. Small things mostly, but accumulated over years. One entry stood out. June 15th, 2019. You witnessed a hit-and-run accident but didn't report it because you were behind schedule and didn't want to be delayed. The victim suffered permanent injuries. Weight reduction, 4.3 kilograms. Raymond remembered that day. He'd seen a car hit a cyclist and drive away. He'd known he should stop, should call the police. But he'd been running late on a delivery with strict deadlines. He'd convinced himself someone else would report it. He'd driven on. "How do you know about that?" Raymond demanded. "The scales measure everything. Every choice, every action, every moment where you chose selfishness over compassion, convenience over doing what's right. Your soul carries the weight of those choices, or rather, it loses weight because of them. What happens if I refuse to address this? You can leave. Drive out of this way station and continue your route. But I guarantee you won't make it to Denver. You'll make a mistake. Run a red light. Fall asleep at the wheel. Misjudge a turn. Drivers with souls below the minimum weight are accidents waiting to happen. The universe corrects for insufficient moral mass." Raymond sat down, feeling dizzy. "What do I have to do?" "Address your debts. The hit and run is the largest. Find the victim. Make amends. Help them in whatever way they need. Once you've added sufficient weight through genuine good actions, you can pass through the scales and continue your route. That could take days, weeks. I have a delivery deadline. You have a choice. Miss your deadline or miss the rest of your life. I recommend addressing the moral debts." Raymond left the office in a daze. He sat in his truck looking at the list of his moral failures. The hit and run was indeed the largest, but there were others. A co-worker he'd lied about to get a promotion. A friend he'd betrayed for personal gain. A charity he'd promised to support but never followed through on. Raymond researched the hit-and-run victim. He found a news article. A woman named Claire Morrison, age 34 at the time, now permanently disabled from the accident. The driver had never been caught. Raymond called the number listed in the article, a contact for Claire's family. He explained who he was, what he'd seen that day, why he hadn't reported it. "I know this doesn't fix anything," Raymond said. "I know I can't undo the damage, but I want to help now. Whatever Claire needs, medical bills, equipment, support services, I'll pay for it, and I'll testify about what I saw if it helps prosecute the driver." Claire's sister was angry initially, but she agreed to pass along Raymond's information. Days later, Raymond met with Claire. She was indeed permanently disabled, confined to a wheelchair, her life completely changed by that hit and run. "Why now?" she asked. "Why help me years after it happened?" Raymond explained about the way station, about his soul being too light, about learning the consequences of his inaction. He expected her to dismiss it as crazy. Instead, Claire nodded. "I've heard about that way station. My uncle was a trucker. He stopped there once, said it changed his life, made him confront all the ways he'd hurt people. He spent months making amends before he could drive through without triggering the deficiency warning. So it's real? This place actually measures souls? I don't know what it measures exactly, but it makes people confront their moral failings. That's real enough." Raymond spent 2 months helping Claire. He paid her medical bills. He arranged for better equipment and support services. He tracked down witnesses to the original hit and run and helped police build a case against the driver, who was eventually prosecuted. During those months, Raymond also addressed the other items on his list. He apologized to the coworker he'd lied about and helped him get a better position. He made a substantial donation to the charity he'd promised to support. He took each moral debt seriously, making genuine amends rather than just going through motions. Finally, Raymond felt ready. He drove back to Kansas, to the way station. He pulled onto the scales. The display showed 82.7. The voice over the loudspeaker said, "Congratulations, Mr. Foster. Your soul weight is now above the minimum threshold. You're cleared to continue your route. Drive safely." Raymond continued to Denver, completing his delivery weeks late. His company wasn't happy about the delay. They suspended him for a month without pay. But Raymond didn't care. He'd addressed moral debts he'd been carrying for years. He'd made amends for choices that had hurt others. His soul, whatever that meant, was heavier now. Stronger. He felt different, better. Raymond continued trucking, but he drove more carefully now. Not just physically, but morally. He helped other drivers when they had trouble. He reported accidents he witnessed. He made choices based on what was right rather than what was convenient. And he told other truckers about the way station. Most didn't believe him, but a few listened. A few shared their own stories of encountering the same station, of learning their souls were too light, of being forced to make amends before they could continue their routes. The way station exists. It's on a small highway in western Kansas, though its exact location seems to shift. Different drivers report finding it at different mile markers, but they all describe the same experience. Scales that measure moral weight rather than physical weight, and an inspector who knows every choice you've ever made that hurt another person. Some drivers avoid Kansas entirely, terrified of what the scales might reveal about their souls. Others seek it out intentionally, wanting to know where they stand morally, wanting the opportunity to address their debts. Raymond drives through Kansas regularly now. He always stops at way stations, hoping to encounter that particular one again. Not because he's worried about his soul weight anymore, but because he wants to see the number. Wants confirmation that he's maintaining his moral mass, that the good choices he makes daily are adding weight rather than reducing it. He's encountered the station 3 times since that first visit. Each time his weight was acceptable. 83.1, 85.4, 87.9. slowly increasing as he continues to make choices that help others rather than just serving himself. Raymond knows now that the universe keeps accounts, that every choice has weight, literally, that souls can be measured and drivers with insufficient moral mass are dangerous to themselves and everyone around them. He wonders how many accidents on American highways are caused by drivers with deficient souls. Drivers who made too many selfish choices, who hurt too many people, whose moral weight dropped below the minimum threshold. Drivers who the universe corrected through fatal mistakes. Raymond drives carefully now, not just watching the road but watching his choices, making sure every decision adds weight rather than reducing it. Making sure his soul stays heavy enough to safely carry the responsibility of moving thousands of pounds of cargo across the country. Because Raymond learned something at that way station. We're all being measured. The scales might not be visible at every stop, but they're always there, totaling our choices, weighing our souls, determining whether we're safe to continue our journey or whether we're accidents waiting to happen. And the only way to pass the scales is to live a life that adds weight. To make choices that help rather than hurt. To address the debts we've accumulated and make genuine amends. Raymond Foster weighs 87.9 kilograms. His soul is heavy with good choices, with amends made, with moral debts repaid. And he plans to keep it that way, adding weight daily through kindness and compassion and doing what's right even when it's inconvenient. Because he knows the truth now. In the end, we're all weighed, and the weight that matters isn't measured in pounds. Story 5. The Convoy of the Damned. Eric Thornton had been a long-haul trucker for 15 years, spending more time on the road than at home. In February of 2023, Eric was hauling machinery parts from Detroit to Los Angeles via Interstate 40. Around 3 in the morning, somewhere in the Texas Panhandle, Eric saw headlights approaching from behind. Multiple trucks moving fast, quickly closing the distance. Within minutes, a convoy of 18-wheelers surrounded Eric's truck. 6 trucks total, 3 ahead of him, 2 on either side, 1 directly behind. They boxed him in completely, matching his speed exactly, maintaining perfect formation. Eric tried to slow down. The convoy slowed with him. He tried to accelerate. They accelerated, maintaining the same spacing. He was trapped in the center of a moving formation with no way to break free. Eric keyed his CB radio. "Breaker 19, this is Desert Wolf. The convoy surrounding me. What's your status? Over." Static answered. Then a voice, distorted and layered as if multiple people spoke simultaneously. "You're part of the convoy now, Eric. You'll drive with us forever. No stops, no rest. Just eternal driving through the darkness." "Who is this? Why are you surrounding me?" "We're the drivers who never stopped. The ones who pushed too hard, drove too long, refused to rest. We died behind the wheel and now we drive forever. And we need new members. The convoy must grow." Eric felt ice in his veins. He remembered stories other truckers told. Urban legends about ghost convoys that appeared on lonely highways, trapping living drivers, forcing them to join an eternal drive. "I'm not dead," Eric transmitted. "I'm alive. Let me go." "Not for long. Stay with the convoy long enough and you'll fall asleep. You'll crash. And then you'll be like us, dead but still driving. Forever." Eric looked at the trucks surrounding him. Their cabs were empty. No drivers visible in any of them. The trucks drove themselves, guided by something that wasn't human. He tried to break formation, jerking his wheel hard to the right. But his steering wouldn't respond. His truck continued straight, locked in position by some force he couldn't understand. Eric checked his instruments. Fuel gauge showed empty, but his engine continued running. Speedometer showed 80 miles per hour, but the landscape outside barely seemed to move. Time felt wrong, distorted, like he was experiencing hours compressed into minutes. The voice on the CB continued, You're feeling it already, the fatigue, the drowsiness. Your body needs rest, but the convoy doesn't stop. You'll try to stay awake. They all do. But eventually you'll fail. You'll close your eyes just for a second. And that's when the accident happens. That's when you die and join us permanently. Eric forced his eyes open wide. He slapped his face. He cranked up the radio, blasting music. He opened the window, letting cold air blast him. Anything to stay awake. But he was exhausted. He'd been driving for 14 hours before the convoy surrounded him. He'd planned to stop soon, to get his mandatory rest. But now he couldn't stop. The convoy wouldn't let him. Hours passed. Or was it minutes? Time felt meaningless. The highway stretched endlessly ahead, unchanging. The same broken white lines, the same dark sky, the same empty landscape. Like they were driving through a loop, covering the same ground repeatedly. Eric tried his phone. No signal. He tried the emergency GPS beacon all commercial trucks carried. It wouldn't activate. He was cut off, isolated in a moving prison made of steel and ghost trucks. His eyes drooped. He shook his head violently, trying to clear it. But the fatigue was overwhelming. His body demanded sleep. His brain was shutting down despite his desperate efforts to stay conscious. "That's it," the voice on the CB encouraged. "Give in. Close your eyes. Join us. The convoy needs you." Eric spotted a road sign ahead. Rest area 2 miles. If he could make it to the rest area, maybe he could break free. Maybe the convoy couldn't follow him off the highway. But as they approached the rest area, Eric's steering still wouldn't respond. His truck continued straight, locked in the convoy's formation. They passed the exit without slowing. Eric was running out of options. He couldn't steer, couldn't stop, couldn't call for help. He was trapped in a moving formation with ghost trucks, slowly succumbing to fatigue that would kill him and bind him to the convoy forever. In desperation, Eric reached for his circuit breakers. If he couldn't control the truck, maybe he could disable it. He pulled the main breaker, killing power to his truck's electrical systems. The engine died. His truck began to slow. But the convoy didn't adjust. The truck behind him should have rear-ended him, but instead it passed through his truck like smoke. All 6 convoy trucks passed through Eric's slowing vehicle, incorporeal and unaffected by physical contact. Eric's truck rolled to a stop on the shoulder. The convoy continued down the highway, disappearing into the darkness. He watched their taillights fade, relief flooding through him. But the voice on the CB returned, no longer distorted, just sad and resigned. "You escaped this time, Eric, but the convoy will find you again. It always does. Once you've been marked, once you've driven with us, you're part of the pattern. We'll surround you again. Eventually, you'll be too tired to escape, and then you'll join us for real." Eric sat on the shoulder for 2 hours, shaking, unable to drive. When dawn came, he called for a tow, claiming mechanical issues. He had his truck checked thoroughly at a shop. Everything was fine mechanically. No explanation for why his steering had locked or why pulling the breaker had been necessary. Eric completed his delivery to Los Angeles, but he quit trucking immediately after. He couldn't risk encountering the convoy again. Couldn't risk being trapped in that formation, slowly succumbing to fatigue until he crashed and died and joined the eternal drive. He took a job at a warehouse. Day shift, normal hours. No overnight driving, no lonely highways. But Eric monitors trucker forums obsessively. He reads reports from other drivers who've encountered the convoy. 6 ghost trucks surrounding living drivers, trapping them, waiting for fatigue to cause the fatal crash that would add them to the convoy's number. Some drivers escape like Eric did. They disable their trucks and wait for the convoy to pass. Others aren't so lucky. They're found crashed on the side of the road, dead behind the wheel, their trucks crushed, but their bodies showing signs they died from falling asleep rather than the impact. And sometimes other truckers report seeing those crashed trucks back on the road, driving in formation with the convoy. The dead drivers still behind their wheels, their trucks repaired by whatever supernatural force animates the convoy. Forever trapped in motion, never resting, always seeking new members. Eric knows he was lucky. He escaped. But he also knows the voice on the CB was right. Once you've been marked, once the convoy has surrounded you, you're part of the pattern. They'll find you again. Sometimes late at night, Eric sees truck headlights through his apartment window. 6 sets of lights moving in formation. They circle his block, searching. He knows they're looking for him, trying to lure him back to the highway, back into the convoy. Eric will never drive a truck again. Will never spend another night on a lonely highway. Because he knows what's out there. Knows that somewhere in the Texas Panhandle and on highways across America, the convoy of the damned continues its eternal drive, seeking living drivers to trap, waiting for fatigue to claim them, growing its numbers one crash at a time. The convoy is real. Ask any trucker who drives overnight. Most will deny it. But some, the ones who've encountered it and escaped, they'll tell you the truth. They'll warn you never to let yourself get surrounded by 6 trucks moving in perfect formation. Never to drive when you're exhausted. Never to push beyond your limits. Because the convoy is always waiting. Always seeking new members, and once it surrounds you, your only hope is to kill your engine before fatigue kills you. Otherwise, you'll crash, you'll die, and you'll spend eternity driving through the darkness, trapped in a formation that never stops, never rests, never reaches its destination. Eric Thornton escaped, but he knows others haven't been so lucky. And every night he wonders how many trucks on America's highways are driven by the dead. How many of those 18-wheelers passing in the darkness are part of the convoy? How many living drivers are currently trapped in formation, fighting sleep, desperately trying to escape before they join the damned in their eternal drive through the night? Story 6. The Road That Eats Memory. Sandra Mitchell had been driving professionally for 18 years when she took a route that erased her identity. In May of 2024, Sandra was hauling electronics from San Francisco to Portland via Interstate 5. It was a familiar route she'd driven dozens of times. But somewhere in Northern California, Sandra took a detour that changed everything. Construction signs indicated Interstate 5 was closed ahead due to an accident. The detour route led onto a state highway Sandra didn't recognize. The road was well maintained but completely unmarked. No route numbers, no mile markers, no signs indicating what highway this was. Sandra followed the detour for 20 miles, expecting to rejoin Interstate 5. But the road continued through empty forest, twisting and turning, never seeming to lead back to the main highway. Sandra checked her GPS. It showed her still on Interstate 5, which was impossible. She was clearly on a different road. She tried her CB radio, hoping to contact other truckers. Only static answered. After 40 miles, Sandra noticed something disturbing. She couldn't remember her name. She knew she was a trucker, knew she was driving electronics to Portland, but her actual name, her identity was gone from her memory. She checked her driver's license. Sandra Mitchell, age 42. But seeing the name didn't trigger recognition. It was like reading a stranger's ID. Sandra pulled over, panic setting in. She tried to remember her family. Nothing. Her home address, blank. Her entire personal history was erased, leaving only her professional knowledge intact. She checked her phone for contacts, hoping to call someone who could help her remember. But the contact list was empty. The phone showed no call history, no messages, no photos, like it had been factory reset. Sandra tried to turn around to drive back the way she'd come, but the road had changed. Behind her was different now. Instead of the twisting forest road she'd driven, there was only a straight, empty highway stretching to the horizon. She continued forward, hoping to find a town, another person, anyone who could help. But the road remained empty. No other vehicles, no buildings, just endless pavement through forest. After hours of driving, Sandra found a rest area. She pulled in desperately, hoping to find help. The facility was standard: restrooms, picnic tables, information boards, but it was completely deserted. Sandra checked the information boards. Maps showed a highway she didn't recognize. The rest area name was listed as Memory Point, which seemed ominous. Inside the restroom, Sandra found graffiti scratched into a stall door. "The road takes who you are. You can only be a driver now. Nothing else. Driver 47. More messages covered the walls, each from someone identified only as driver, followed by a number. All described the same phenomenon: taking this road erased their identities. They couldn't remember their names, their families, their lives before becoming truckers. They existed only as drivers, their entire identities reduced to their profession. Sandra found a marker in her truck and added her own message. Driver 73, May 2024. I was Sandra Mitchell. I had a family. I had a life. Now I only remember driving. If you find this, don't stay on this road. Turn back before it takes everything." She wrote the number 73 because that's how many different driver numbers she'd counted in the graffiti. 73 people had been trapped on this road before her, all losing their identities, all reduced to just being drivers. Sandra continued north, determined to escape this cursed highway. But as she drove, she lost more memories. Her professional history vanished, training, experience, knowledge, all erased. She kept driving because it was instinctive, automatic, but she couldn't remember how she'd learned. Eventually, Sandra forgot why she was driving, forgot her cargo, her destination, her purpose. She existed only in the moment, mechanically operating a truck, following a road that went nowhere. Time became meaningless. Sandra drove for what might have been days or weeks. She didn't stop for sleep or food, didn't need to. Her body functioned on autopilot while her mind was a blank slate, empty of identity, purpose, or memory. Then suddenly, Sandra found herself on Interstate 5. Real Interstate 5 with route markers and traffic and all the normal signs of civilization. She was approaching Portland, exactly where she was supposed to be delivering her cargo. Sandra pulled into the delivery location in a daze. Workers unloaded her trailer. Everything was normal, routine, professional. "You okay?" one of the workers asked. "You look confused." Sandra struggled to speak. "I don't know who I am." The worker laughed, thinking it was a joke. "Long drive, huh? Get some rest." Sandra collected her paperwork and payment, then sat in her truck trying to understand what had happened. She checked her phone. All her contacts were back. Call history, messages, photos, everything restored as if it had never been erased. She looked at her driver's license again. Sandra Mitchell. This time, the name felt familiar. Memories began returning. Her family, her home, her life history, everything flooding back like a dam breaking. But Sandra also remembered the road, the highway without markers, the rest area called Memory Point. The graffiti from 73 drivers who'd lost themselves. She researched obsessively, found no information about a detour route in that area, no highway matching the description, no rest area called Memory Point. Like it didn't officially exist, but Sandra found online forums where other truckers described similar experiences. Taking unmarked detours, losing their memories, driving for hours or days while their identities were erased. Eventually finding themselves back on normal highways with their memories restored, but haunted by the experience. One trucker posted a theory. The road was a filter, a test. It took everything away to see if you could still function as a pure driver, stripped of personality and history. Those who could drive without identity, without purpose, purely on instinct. They were returned to normal highways with their memories restored. Those who couldn't handle the emptiness, who needed identity to function, were never heard from again. Sandra counted the driver numbers she'd seen in the graffiti. 73. But forum posts suggested hundreds of drivers had experienced the memory road, which meant most who entered that highway never made it back. They remained there, driving endlessly, their identities permanently erased, reduced to pure function without personality. Sandra quit long-haul trucking after that experience. She took local routes, staying close to home, avoiding any possibility of detour routes or unmarked highways. She couldn't risk encountering that road again. But she thinks about the drivers still there. Driver 1 through driver 73 and beyond. All those people who lost their identities and never got them back. Are they still driving that endless highway? Still operating their trucks on pure instinct? Empty vessels moving cargo through a space that exists outside normal geography? Sandra doesn't know, but she watches for detour signs now with extreme caution. Never follows routes that aren't explicitly marked. Never trusts construction signs that lead onto highways without route numbers. Because the memory road is real. It exists somewhere in the spaces between normal highways. And once it takes your identity, you might never get it back. You might become driver number whatever, your name and life erased, your existence reduced to pure function, driving forever through a landscape that exists only to strip away who you are and leave behind only what you do. Sandra Mitchell survived. She got her identity back. But she knows others weren't so lucky. And she wonders when she sees trucks on the highway with drivers who seem absent, who stare straight ahead without personality or presence, whether they're people who escaped the memory road but didn't get everything back. Whether they returned to normal highways but remained partially empty, driving out of habit rather than purpose, existing without fully remembering who they used to be. The road takes memory. It takes identity. It takes everything that makes you a person and leaves only the function of driving. And somewhere out there, it's still taking detours, still trapping drivers, still erasing identities one person at a time. Don't follow the unmarked detours. Don't trust highways without route numbers. And if you find yourself on a road that feels wrong, that seems to stretch forever without destination, turn back immediately. Before it takes who you are and leaves only what you do. Before you become just another driver number scratched into a bathroom wall at a rest area that doesn't officially exist. Story 7. The passenger who wasn't there. Michael Torres had been hauling freight for 20 years, always driving solo, never picking up hitchhikers. It was a firm rule he'd never broken, until November of 2023, when he found a passenger in his truck who had always been there but never existed. Michael was driving from Phoenix to Seattle, taking Interstate 5 through California. Around midnight, somewhere south of Sacramento, he glanced at his passenger seat and saw someone sitting there. A man in his 30s wearing casual clothes, staring straight ahead through the windshield. Michael jerked the wheel in shock, nearly losing control. He'd been driving alone all day. No one had been in the passenger seat. Where had this person come from? "Who the hell are you?" Michael demanded, pulling onto the shoulder. "How did you get in my truck?" The passenger turned to look at him with blank eyes. "I've been here the whole time, Michael. I'm always here. You just usually don't see me. That's impossible. I've been alone all day." "Have you?" The passenger smiled. "Check your memory carefully. Really remember. Haven't I been here all along?" Michael tried to remember. He'd started in Phoenix that morning, loaded his cargo, started driving, alone, right? But as he focused on the memories, they seemed uncertain. Had there been someone in the passenger seat? The memories were fuzzy, incomplete. "You're confused because I exist in a quantum state," the passenger explained. I'm both here and not here simultaneously. Most people can only perceive one state at a time. Right now, you're perceiving my presence. But an hour ago, you were perceiving my absence. Both are equally true. This doesn't make sense. People can't exist in quantum states. That's physics, not biology. I'm not biological. I'm a pattern, a probability function that collapses differently depending on observation. I've been riding with you for years, Michael. Every trip, every load. Sometimes you see me, sometimes you don't. But I'm always here. Michael checked his rearview mirror. In the reflection, the passenger seat looked empty. But when he looked directly, the passenger was clearly visible. "What do you want?" Michael asked, fear tight in his voice. "To talk. That's all I ever want. But you never see me long enough to have a conversation. Usually I flicker in and out of your perception. A glimpse in the corner of your eye, a sense of presence. But tonight something's different. Tonight I'm stable. You can perceive me continuously. So let's talk." Michael considered jumping out of the truck and running, but something kept him in his seat, curiosity mixed with a strange familiarity. Like he did know this passenger, did recognize him from somewhere. "Talk about what?" Michael asked. Your choices, your life, the roads you've taken. I'm here to help you understand consequences. Every time you make a significant decision, I appear. I observe the outcome. I'm the manifestation of your alternative selves, the versions of Michael Torres who made different choices. The passenger gestured, and the truck filled with images. Michael saw himself at various ages making different choices, accepting different jobs, marrying different women, taking different routes. Each choice spawned a branching timeline, a new Michael Torres living a slightly different life. "In this timeline, you're a trucker," the passenger said. "Successful, experienced, but alone, divorced, estranged from your children. In other timelines, you made different choices. Some are happier, some are sadder. I exist at the intersection of all these timelines. I'm the part of you that observes all the paths you didn't take. Why show me this now? Because you're approaching a choice, a significant one. In 20 miles, you'll encounter a situation. How you respond will determine which timeline you continue in. I'm here to help you understand what's at stake." Michael drove, unsettled but unable to deny the passenger's reality. 20 miles later, he saw it. A car on the shoulder, hazard lights flashing. A woman standing next to it, waving for help. "This is the choice," the passenger said. "And do you stop or keep driving?" Michael's rules said never stop, never get involved, stay on schedule. But the woman looked desperate. "Show me the timelines," Michael said. What happens if I stop? What happens if I drive past?" The passenger gestured again. Images filled the truck. Timeline 1. Michael stops. The woman is genuinely in trouble. He helps her, calls for assistance. They talk while waiting. She's heading to see her sick father. Michael's kindness makes a difference in a difficult moment. They exchange numbers. 6 months later, they're dating. A year after that, married. Michael's life gains meaning, connection, happiness. He reconciles, with his children having learned from his past mistakes. He dies at 83, surrounded by family, his life rich with love. Timeline 2. Michael drives past, stays on schedule, maintains his rules. The woman waits for hours before getting help. Michael completes his delivery on time, returns home to his empty apartment, continues his solitary existence, retires alone, dies at 76 in a nursing home, no visitors, no family, his life defined by efficiency and isolation. "Those are the extremes," the passenger explained. "Many variations exist between them, but the core choice is the same. Connection or isolation, help or indifference, love or efficiency." Michael looked at the woman on the shoulder, looked at the passenger, looked at the roads ahead, literal and metaphorical. If I see the future, does it affect my choice? Am I really choosing or just acting on knowledge of outcomes? You're always choosing based on some prediction of outcomes. I'm just making that prediction more accurate. Free will exists in the choice to value connection over convenience, people over schedules. The specific outcomes may vary, but the principle remains. Michael pulled onto the shoulder behind the woman's car. He climbed out, leaving the passenger in the truck. He helped the woman. Jennifer was her name. Her car had overheated. Michael called a tow truck and waited with her. They talked. She was indeed heading to see her sick father in Seattle. Michael was heading to Seattle too. I can give you a ride, Michael offered. My company's policies technically don't allow passengers, but in an emergency, Jennifer accepted gratefully. She climbed into Michael's truck, into the passenger seat, where the quantum passenger had been sitting. Michael looked, but the strange passenger was gone, or rather transformed. Jennifer was real, physical, present. But Michael felt an echo of the other passenger's presence, like different timelines had collapsed into this one. Like the quantum possibility had resolved into concrete reality. They drove to Seattle together, talked for hours, shared stories, connected. By the time Michael dropped Jennifer at the hospital, he'd agreed to have coffee with her the next day. The relationship developed exactly as the timeline vision had shown. Dating, love, marriage, reconciliation with his children. A life defined by connection rather than isolation. Michael drove trucks for another 15 years before retiring. He never saw the quantum passenger again. But sometimes in his peripheral vision he sensed a presence, a reminder of roads not taken, choices not made, timelines that existed as possibilities but never became reality. And Michael was grateful. Grateful he'd seen the passenger that night. Grateful for the vision of possible futures. Grateful he'd made the choice to stop, to help, to connect. Because the passenger was right. We're all approaching choices constantly. Most seem insignificant, but some are pivot points. Moments where our timelines branch dramatically based on what we choose. The passenger exists for all of us, whether we perceive them or not. The manifestation of our alternative selves, the quantum possibilities we don't pursue. Usually we never see them, never get the benefit of knowing what might have been. But sometimes on lonely highways, in moments of uncertainty, the passenger appears. Shows us the roads ahead, helps us understand what's at stake, and then vanishes, leaving us to make our choices with full knowledge of their consequences. Michael Torres saw his passenger, made his choice, lived the timeline that led to love rather than isolation. And he's grateful every day for that quantum probability function that collapsed into reality in the form of a woman stranded on a highway, needing help from a trucker who almost drove past but didn't. The passenger is always there, sitting beside us, observing our choices, waiting for the moment when perception shifts and we see them clearly. And when we do, when we face our quantum passenger and understand the weight of our choices, we have the opportunity to select the timeline we truly want. Not the efficient one, not the safe one, not the one that follows all the rules, but the one that leads to connection, love, and a life rich with meaning. Michael chose well. And somewhere, in all the other timelines where different Michael Torreses made different choices, quantum passengers still sit in empty trucks waiting for their drivers to see them and understand what's truly at stake on the roads we travel. Story 8. The Final Delivery. Christopher Webb had been driving trucks for 24 years when he received a delivery assignment that shouldn't have existed. In January of 2024, Christopher was contacted by a broker he'd never worked with before, offering an unusual job. Transport a sealed container from a warehouse in New Orleans to an address in rural Maine. The pay was extraordinary, 10 times the normal rate for that distance and cargo weight. "What's in the container?" Christopher asked. "That information is confidential. The container is sealed and must remain sealed. You're being paid for discretion and reliability. Do you accept?" Christopher needed the money. His truck needed expensive repairs. His daughter needed tuition money. Against his better judgment, he accepted. The container was loaded at midnight. It was approximately 8 feet long, 3 feet wide, 3 feet tall. Made of brushed metal with no markings except a serial number. Heavy based on how the loading equipment strained. And cold. Christopher could feel coolness radiating from it even standing several feet away. He secured it in his temperature-controlled trailer and started the long drive north. The route took him up the East Coast through cities and countryside, a journey he'd made dozens of times before. Around Maryland, Christopher heard something from the container. A sound like breathing, slow, rhythmic, mechanical, or biological, he couldn't tell which. He pulled over and checked the trailer. The container sat secured, its seals intact. But the breathing sound was definitely coming from inside, and the metal was frosting over, ice crystals forming on its surface despite the trailer being temperature-controlled at 50 degrees. Christopher called the broker. "There's something alive in this container. I can hear it breathing. What am I really transporting?" "You're transporting a sealed container. That's all you need to know. Continue your delivery. Do not open the container under any circumstances. Do not stop except for fuel. Complete the delivery and you'll receive your payment." "I'm not comfortable with this. I'm returning the cargo." "Mr. Webb, read your contract carefully. Section 12, subsection C. You've accepted legal responsibility for the cargo. If you abandon it or return it undelivered, you're liable for its full value, which is listed as $8 million. Can you afford an $8 million liability?" Christopher checked the contract on his tablet. The clause was there, buried in legal language. He was trapped. He had to complete the delivery or face financial ruin. He continued driving, but his unease grew with every mile. The breathing from the container became louder, and now he heard other sounds, scratching, like something inside was trying to get out. In Connecticut, Christopher stopped for fuel. While pumping diesel, another trucker approached. "What you got in your trailer?" the man asked. "I can hear it from here. Sounds like it's alive." "I don't know. Sealed container. I was told not to open it." "Man, you better find out. If you're transporting something illegal and you get caught, you're the one going to prison, not the broker who hired you." Christopher knew the trucker was right. He returned to his trailer and stood before the container, trying to decide what to do. The breathing and scratching continued. Whatever was inside wanted out. Christopher made a decision. He broke the seal. The container opened with a hiss of escaping cold air. Frost billowed out, obscuring Christopher's vision. When it cleared, he saw what was inside. A person, or what had been a person. Suspended in some kind of gel, tubes and wires connected to their body, keeping them alive in a state between life and death. The person's eyes were open, staring at Christopher with desperate pleading. Christopher stumbled back, horrified. This wasn't cargo. This was a human being kept in suspended animation, being transported like freight. He tried to wake the person to remove the tubes, but he didn't know how without potentially killing them. He called 911, explaining he'd discovered a person sealed in a container he was hired to transport. Police and paramedics arrived. They extracted the person carefully. A woman, late 30s, unresponsive but alive. The paramedics recognized the equipment. It was experimental cryogenic suspension technology not yet approved for human use. The police detained Christopher, questioning him about human trafficking. He showed them his contract, his communication with the broker. Everything he knew, which was very little. Detectives investigated. The broker's company was fake, registered to a shell corporation that didn't officially exist. The warehouse in New Orleans where Christopher had picked up the cargo had been empty for years. The delivery address in Maine was a vacant lot. The woman in the container was eventually identified. Dr. Rachel Winters, a biomedical researcher who disappeared 3 months earlier. She'd been working on illegal human experimentation for a shadowy organization. When she tried to quit, they'd put her into cryogenic suspension and were transporting her to a facility where they could either eliminate her or force her to continue her research. Christopher had unwittingly been recruited to transport a kidnapped scientist. The extraordinary pay was compensation for carrying illegal human cargo. The sealed container was meant to prevent discovery. Christopher wasn't charged. Investigators determined he was an unknowing participant. But his trucking career was over. His company terminated him for accepting a delivery without proper documentation. Other companies wouldn't hire him, viewing him as a liability. Dr. Winters recovered but was placed in witness protection, her testimony crucial in prosecuting the organization that had kidnapped her. She met with Christopher once before disappearing into her new identity. "Thank you for opening the container," she said. "Another day in suspension might have caused permanent brain damage. You saved my life by breaking your contract. I lost everything. My career, my reputation, my daughter had to drop out of college because I can't afford tuition anymore." Dr. Winters handed him an envelope. Inside was a check for $2 million. From a settlement fund. The organization's assets were seized. Victims and those who helped us are being compensated. It won't fix everything, but it's something. Christopher took the money, paid off his debts, covered his daughter's tuition, but he never drove a truck again. The experience had taught him that some cargo isn't worth the payment, no matter how extraordinary. That sealed containers can hide terrible things. That the highest-paying jobs are often the most dangerous. He works in logistics now, an office job, coordinating shipments but never transporting them himself. And he warns other truckers about accepting jobs that seem too good to be true, about sealed cargo with confidential contents, about contracts with liability clauses that trap you into completing illegal deliveries. Because the final delivery, the job that ends your career, that forces you to choose between financial ruin and moral compromise, it's out there, waiting, offered by brokers who don't exist, transporting cargo that shouldn't be moved, heading to destinations that vanish when investigated. Christopher Webb received that final delivery, made his choice, opened the container instead of completing the transport, lost his career but saved a life and maybe in some way saved himself. Because he learned that not all cargo is freight. Some of it is human, some of it is living, breathing suffering, and when you transport that kind of cargo unknowingly, when you discover what you're really carrying, you have to decide: complete the delivery and be complicit in something terrible, or break your contract and face the consequences. Christopher chose to break the contract, to save Dr. Winters even if it meant destroying his own life. And he believes that was the right choice, even though it cost him everything he'd worked for over 24 years. The final delivery comes for every trucker eventually. That one job that tests who you really are, that forces you to choose between money and morality, that makes you decide what you value more, your career or your conscience. When that delivery comes, Christopher hopes other truckers make the choice he did, that they open the sealed containers, that they report what they find, that they refuse to be unknowing accomplices in trafficking humans, in moving illegal experiments, in transporting horrors that belong in nightmares rather than on America's highways. Because the final delivery is always waiting, always being offered, always tempting exhausted drivers with extraordinary pay for questionable cargo. And someone accepts it every day, loading sealed containers into their trailers, thinking it's just another job. not realizing they're transporting something that will force them to choose between everything they've built and everything they believe. Christopher Webb made his choice, lost his career, gained his soul, and he hopes his story warns other drivers to be careful what contracts they accept, what cargo they agree to transport, what final deliveries they allow to become their last. Because some jobs aren't worth taking, some payments aren't worth accepting, and some sealed containers are better left unopened, or better yet, never loaded in the first place.